All right, hey everybody, thanks so much for coming. We're going to talk about Jest testing. Anybody heard about Jest yet? Anybody using it right now? So Jest is like this super cool framework that I'm going to talk to you about today, and we're going to take a look at how we'd use this with NGRX. But first, before we get into it too far, tell you a little bit of a story about this. So I love testing, right? I always kick off every project, and I'm like, okay, we're going to write a bunch of tests. We're going to make sure everything's got really great coverage. And then we start getting into our sprint, and things start to grind a little bit. We start to get a little bit behind, and okay, we only got like a certain percentage of coverage, and then we get a little further along, and that percentage keeps going down. And testing takes a lot of time. And before we know it, what happens is that we kind of put the tests on the back burner so we can get our code out to production, and we just never make it. So really what I like to think here is I really like the idea of testing. And actually, I really like the idea of you writing tests, because my code's pretty good. You know, I don't really have to worry about my code. It's your code that I'm really kind of concerned about. So testing's hard. We never have enough time. I have to do a lot of setup. I got to deal with mocks. I got to deal with my data. I got to figure out, okay, hey, I'm going to expect this, and then what it's going to expect, and making sure that data all looks right. And it's almost like a whole new set of code that I need to maintain just to be able to run the tests. Okay, and so I never have enough time. I've got all these deadlines and whatnot. And so here comes this library called Jest. And Jest really is going to change how you think about testing. How are you going to approach your testing? So Jest was developed by the Facebook team, and it's great for reactive testing. So it's built upon a library called JS it's a JavaScript implementation. Very similar, like running a headless browser like Chrome. But it's a pure JavaScript implementation, and it's super, super fast. So why use Jest? One is that it is super fast. And one of the things that it does is it allows all your failed tests to run first. So you ever had it where you got 1,000 tests, and you got 2 or 3 that are failing, but they don't run till like, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes in, and by that time, you're already on Facebook, and you're kind of checking stuff out, and well, that all goes away. The other really big thing here, and what we're going to dig in today, is snapshot testing. And this is really going to change how you set up your tests, and it's going to save you a ton of time. The other great thing about Jest here is all your tests are sandboxed. So they run in their own little worker. All globals are all cleaned up. You don't have to worry about the fact of like, hey, we're polluting test to test to test. And sometimes, depending on the order that they run, they fail. We don't have to worry about that. So they're all sandboxed. Another great thing here, who likes errors in Karma right now with the test runner? Who loves just scrolling through stack traces, right? Well, that all goes away. So now you get some really nice error reporting that's going to tell you the exact line of where things are at. Here's what I expected. Here's what I received, and give me a really nice output so that I don't have to go run this thing down and try to figure out what's going on. The other beautiful thing here is that from just a pure JavaScript implementation, it's zero config. I don't actually have to configure anything. Now, for running in the CLI, that's not totally true. We have to do a little bit of configuration, but I'm going to walk you through that today, and it's super simple. So let's talk about installation. Installs are super simple. I don't even have to install Jest itself. If you actually just install the Jest preset Angular package, it will go ahead and install Jest. It'll install this preset here. This is going to set up most of my configuration for me. It's going to load a library called TS-Jest so that it can deal with TypeScript. It also loads the Jest types. So what's really nice here is that Jest is built upon Jasmine. So as you're going to see here when we start getting into a few examples, this is going to look exactly like what you've already been writing. You're not having to learn a whole new way of writing tests, a whole new language and descriptors, whatnot. You have describes, you have test, you have it. You can use Jest to run your existing tests. You don't even really have to convert them. So one of the things we have to do is we have to get Jest configured. Partly we need to tell it, for all of our preset variables, we want to use this Jest preset Angular. Now I can put this either into a Jest config or I can put it into my package.json. I really like it here so that it's not polluting my package. I want to keep things really, really simple for my package, and I don't want to have to put that there. I want to tell it where my roots are, and then I want to tell it where this setup Jest file is. So one of the problems with JS-DOM is it doesn't have this property called transform. And so we need to go ahead and add a setup Jest here to define a property on our document body style called transform. And once we have that, then this will work with our Angular code really nicely. So now running tests. Running tests is super simple. I can either just run Jest straight up, and it'll go ahead and kick off my test for me, or I can go into my package.json and change my test key there under scripts to Jest, and I can add additional stuff. I can do -- coverage or -- watch, however I want to run that. And then I can just run npm test if I want. So again, really simple to configure here. Didn't have to do a whole lot. The preset library makes this really simple, and then up and away I'm going. I can start writing tests and running them right away. So I talked about error outputs. So that whole stack trace thing with Karma just drives me crazy because I'm scroll all the way back up to the top to try to figure out what's going on and where the error is occurring. So, and even then I've got this crazy stack trace. I've got to sit there and kind of like look and figure out what line. This test output here is beautiful. I can see exactly, hey, I wrote this test, and you can kind of see here at the bottom, you know, I expect the sum function of 1 and 2 to be 4, so I got a little bit of problem here with my expectation. But I get a really nice output on what's going on. All right, so code coverage. One of the nice things about Jest is code coverage comes out of the box. I don't have to pull anything in. I don't have to pull in Istanbul or get that all configured. Now, I know we have it really nice when we're dealing with the CLI, because with the CLI, it automatically goes ahead and configures this for me. But if I want to make changes to that, then obviously I've got to go configure that on my own. So here, I can go ahead and just do -- coverage, and it'll go ahead and give me an output like this. So now I can see with my statements, branches, functions, and lines, what percentage of coverage I have on each one. And it doesn't totally fit in there, but it'll show me whatever uncovered lines I have. So super simple on our test coverage. There's a couple other options here with the CLI. One is I want to filter tests by file names. So if I only want to run tests that are within the sum library or any TS files that I have that are named sum or match on sum, so it's going to use a regex expression here. But I want to run that with coverage. It's only going to run ones with that file name. I can also put Jest into a watch mode. So watch mode is also a very powerful way of running tests. When I go into a watch mode, it's going to go ahead and bring up this menu. I can press A to run all tests. I can press F to only run failed tests. So if I've got a bunch of tests that are failing, I don't have to sit here and deal with, like, who's done F describe, who's done F it, and then who's done X describe and then checked it in, right? I mean, I'm totally guilty of that. And I'm like, wow, our coverage just like went way, way down. So I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to sit there and manipulate my code to try to just run the tests that are failing. I can quickly just get down to that. Also, when we're doing snapshots, which we'll talk about in a minute, when those are failing, it'll also give me an option to update those. And I can step through one by one to get them updated, or I can play the Vegas version of it, which I just roll the dice, and just throw it down and see, and just update all of them. So we'll talk about that in a second. All right, Jest globals here. These globals should look very familiar. These are all pretty much the same globals that you have with Jasmine. Really, the main difference here is we have two of them, require actual and require mock. So those are two different globals that are available. But otherwise, everything else that's there is stuff that you're already used to. So let's take a look at ngrx, a simple action. Here what we have is a simple action that does our select. And what we have is our type is customer action types of select. And I have a constructor with a payload that's public. So what I know with this is I can test on the type, and I can test what my payload is and make sure that my action's doing what I want. So pretty simple test, right? So here's my test written for Jest. I have my describe, customer select, should set the selected ID. Now what I've done here is I've got a customer object. So there's some of my test data. And I'm creating a new action, and I'm calling my customer action select, passing it that customer. And then I'm writing expect action type to be customer select, expect action payload to be my customer. This is great. This should look really familiar. This is probably how you're already writing code. So this isn't really anything special, and there's really no reason to go to Jest if you're going to write tests like this, other than the watch and a few things like that. So that's where we get into snapshot testing. Snapshot testing compares the expectation to a stored snapshot. So what's going to happen now, it's going to create a folder right next to your test called I think it's _ snapshot, and it's going to store snapshots of what your expectations are. The beautiful part is if it doesn't exist, it's going to go ahead and create it for you. So you don't have to go and manually try to figure out like, okay, what's the expected output here? And we spend so much time trying to code these up to figure out, and then when it changes, now we have to maintain all of this. That all goes away. So it's going to perform a diff on our snapshot. So this is going to look just like what you see in Git. So you're going to see a diff, and hey, this is what I expected, this is what I received, and it's going to be red and green, and you're going to be able to see where the changes are. So you can determine very quickly, hey, is this right or is this wrong? Is this based off the refactor I just did, or is this something, some other problem that I haven't been aware of? And I can easily update these snapshots on this refactor. So I can use the watch, I can step through file by file and say, yep, go ahead and update this. This is great, I'm good. Or I can say, no, go ahead and set these aside and I'll come back to them. And then I can go back and look at them and inspect them one by one. Now the other thing with snapshots is these are going to get checked in with your code. So these are going to go up to Git. So they're going to be part of your review process. When you're doing your PRs, you're going to be looking at snapshot files and making sure, does this make sense? So if I've got a developer that is checking in a bunch of stuff and they just did the massive, hey, let's just roll the dice and update it all. Me as a reviewer on a pull request, it's going to be my responsibility to take a look at that and go like, hey, this doesn't actually make sense. So let's look at a snapshot test example here. So here, this is the same exact test, slightly simplified, but we've got our customer action select with a customer, that data is defined somewhere else. And now all we have to do is say, expect my action payload to match my snapshot. So I don't have to actually go set up a whole bunch of data. I don't have to, I do have to set up a customer to pass in, but I don't have to sit there and maintain what it looks like and making sure all the everything matches exactly the same. So what's actually stored? In my snapshot here, it's going to go ahead and store based on the name of the test. If I have multiple expectations, then it's going to denote 1, 2, 3, 4, whatnot in it. And it's going to go ahead and the value on this is going to be an object, and this is my customer object. So I can quickly take a look at this and say, yeah, that's actually correct. That's what I'm expecting my payload to be as this customer. So visually, I'm able to inspect it very, very quickly. I don't have to maintain this. When it changes, it's going to tell me that it's not the same, and I can determine whether or not this makes sense to update my snapshot or if I need to fix my code. All right, here. So on a reducer. So reducers are pretty simple to test. They are, I'm getting my timer back up there, make sure we don't run over. Timer. So a reducer is really nothing more than a very simple function with a big old switch statement in it, right? So here what we have is we have our select action type where we're spreading our state and then we're setting our selected customer ID. So for us to test that, we have our describe and our test. We're setting up our action with a new select, and then we're calling our reducer function, giving it some initial state and an action, and we get a new state. And then from there, I can say, expect this result to match my snapshot. So this is a great way of being able to test my reducer. If you think about reducers, reducers are always responsible for taking a given state with an action, and now we're producing a new state. So now I can go through all my different scenarios very quickly about, based off if I have this state and then I pass it this action, am I going to end up in the state that I think I'm going to end up in? So I can code these up very, very quickly. I can go ahead and pass in the correct state to hit the scenarios that I want to, and I don't have to do a lot of maintenance on this. Now we get into effects. Effects are a little bit more tricky. So when we look at this here, we have an observable. We're watching for the customer action type load. So that's what we're going to watch for. We're waiting for that to fire, and when that fires, we're going to call a service, and that service is going to return a new observable, right? And I'm going to map that to either a load success or I'm going to catch the error and do a load fail. So when initially looking at this, it's like, oh my God, how do I test this? This is like an observable within an observable, and how do I pull this all together? Well, that is actually handled really nicely by a library called RxJS Marbles. So what this does is this gives us a synchronous and dependable way to test asynchronous code. So we can control when things get emitted and what gets emitted. It gives us two main methods. One is a hot. The hot gives us an observer or a subject that behaves as if it's been running the entire time, and the cold gives us an observable that fires up as soon as the tests fire up. So let's take a look at what the testing might look like for this. All right, see if I can explain this to you here. So we have an action. We're going to watch for a load. And then on the completion, we're expecting a load success. The response here is the response that I want to have the service handle. And so I want it to return a list of customers. And my expected ending result is the completion, which is my load success. So I want an observable of a load success with an array of customers returned. So the next thing I'm going to do is on my action stream, I'm going to go ahead and set a hot subject here, and it's going to be the action. So this is automatically going to fire up, watching for the load action. And the next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and mock the customer service load. So Jest has a nice function called fn that then I can go ahead and say, set this load to be my response. My response is a subject. Actually, that's an observable, and it's going to resolve to an array of customers. And then from there, I can say, expect the effects load to match my snapshot of the expected. The expected, again, is the completion. The completion is the load success with that array. And so what's going to get stored into my snapshot is an observable with my action, with my array of customers. So it makes it really easy to be able to update the snapshot, make sure the data's right. I don't have to do some crazy comparisons and try to figure it out. It's actually going to wrap the whole thing and store that off for me. And this will be nice, clean, and succinct. So the other side of the effect is we need to test the error path. So what's beautiful here is I can use the pound sign. So everything's pretty much the same, right? I'm watching for the load, for the action, but my completion is a load fail with expecting an error. And in my response, I want to have from the service is an error, and I want to go ahead and let that fire. And at the end here, I'm going to make sure that it's going to match my snapshot of expected, which is observable with a load fail with a message of error. So really quick here, we're going to wrap up. The components is the other really powerful piece. So this allows me to go ahead and take a component. When you think about components, especially presentation components, they're deterministic. Based on a given state, they will render the same exact way every single time. So knowing that, I can go ahead and pass an array of customers and go ahead and set that on my component, call fixture, detect changes, and now expect my fixture to match the snapshot. So if I come over here, let me just make this a little bigger for you. Here's the output. Now I can see I have my app customers. It got set to an array, and within that, it went ahead and rendered the app customers. Actually, it rendered the child, and the child produced the unordered list and the line item with customer 1, test 1. So I can automatically have it go ahead and render out my HTML and make sure that it's actually still rendering the same way. So a really good example, if let's say I had a bunch of tags or links that were first pointing to Instagram, and then I make some changes because now we want it to point to Facebook, I'd be able to see that very, very quickly. So this is a really great way to be able to test your components and make sure that they're working the way that you want and they're rendering the way that you want. All right. So just to wrap up, Jest is a really great library for being able to test quickly. I don't have a whole lot of setup, very little configuration. My tests run faster. I don't have to wait for my failed tests to run. They're going to come right up to the front. I can move through them quickly. The greatest advantage here to me is when we go and refactor, now I have 200 tests. Now I no longer have to comment all those out to get it to production, right? I can get those fixed in usually a couple of hours versus a week or two, right? So lastly, just really quick, my name is Jesse Sanders. I'm the CEO of Breebug. What we do is architecture reviews, customized training, and Angular consulting. You can reach me at jesses_Breebug, or you can reach me at my email, which is jesse.sanders@Breebug. If you found this presentation interesting and you'd like to learn a little bit more about it, come by. We've got a booth right outside here, and would love to meet you and get your questions. I'll take any questions out in the hallway. So thank you for coming.